Efficiency Unlocked is hosted by two tech-savvy physicians and dear friends of mine, Drs. Carewe and Dale Gold, who are experts in using technology to automate routine tasks and increase efficiency in everyday and business life. Let's see what they have for us today.
AI has been unleashed without specifically thinking of it as a medical support to patients. And all of a sudden, there's a source of advice of second opinion, which is highly flawed, has many holes in it, but in the absence of time with a doctor, in the presence of doctors who sometimes are not in the top half of their class, and are not up to date, patients are helping themselves.
Welcome to NerdMD's Efficiency Unlocked, hosted by Dale Gold and Adam Carewe. That was Zak Kohane, a pioneering figure in AI and biomedical informatics at Harvard Medical School. With decades of experience, Zak has been at the forefront of using technology to transform medicine. He's co-authored influential books like The AI Revolution in Medicine with Microsoft's Peter Lee, and has been testing AI in healthcare since the 1990s. Zak has explored AI's potential in early disease detection, robotic surgery, and more. In this episode, we dive into the future of healthcare, AI-driven innovation, and challenges facing modern medicine. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of NerdMD's Efficiency Unlocked. We're super happy to have I would consider one of the forefathers of informatics and bioinformatics and medicine and research with us today, Zak Kohane from Harvard Medical School. Thank you for joining the show, Zak.
Great to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
Great to have you, Zak.
I mean, Dale and I, obviously, we talked a lot before this episode because we really want to dive into a lot of the kind of the deeper kind of things, even, looking into even that future kind of the next 3, 5, 10 years, which we know you've alluded to many times in books and other podcasts and speaking engagements. But I think the three of us with our backgrounds and everything, I think we can dive pretty deep. But I think, our podcast, we always like to obviously talk about the person because I think that frames the show and tells a bit about who we're interviewing. And I think I guess when I was looking at your Zak Labs website and other, things that you've written, you're clear about your mission, about what you're trying to do, and I think, and also you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, like you've been doing AI and medicine, frankly, like when the internet was kind of starting timeline wise. So, I mean, thinking of your inspiration for your mission, which is really, and this is paraphrasing, but like, helping a new generation of scientists and care delivery providers to advance biomedicine and big data with big data. What's your inspiration behind that? And how early in your career did you start to sense that and see that as being so important?
Well, I think there's, like many of my contemporaries, but I think it continues to this day, if someone gets involved in medicine, and I didn't know what I was doing when I pointed myself towards medical school because there was no one in my family who had gone into medicine. And I thought I was going to be a scientist. And then I got into medicine. I said, wow, this is a very noble profession, but it's not a scientific endeavor, although it's held by scientific endeavors. And I did my PhD, but when I came back, I was boggled by how many things could be improved. Not only could be improved, but just weren't being done in the absence of reminders, of keeping things in memory without overwhelming our memory, remembering all the things that we barely learned in medical school. And it just seemed to me bizarre, the disconnect that I was seeing between the way medicine was being practiced and the way I thought they could be practiced. Because after all, when we fly airplanes, we're very worried about safety of the passengers. And it seemed to me that we were making casual decisions about patients every day with very few safety features and not a lot of going back to the primary sources for good reasons, because there's a lot to be done, and there was a lot having to be smashed in the short time we're seeing patients. But it seemed hopelessly out of date. And I remember when there was one of the Star Trek movies where where I think Scotty famously tries to interact with a Macintosh. He picks up the mouse and says, "Hello, computer." And but in the same thing, Bones, the doctor, is like passing patients in the corridor of the line. He picks up their clipboard and sees that they're a cancer patient. He says, "Oh my God, I can't believe what primitive stuff is being doing." And that was my feeling throughout my medical training. And it would be rounding on a patient on a ventilator, and here I was post call, very tired, and yet we would talk for about 15 minutes arguing about how much pressure to go up on various parts of the ventilator pip, and the reality, and no one knows what they're doing and why, and the arguments are sort of bizarre. And so, and I, in fact, one of my former students, Yao's son, actually implemented a fuzzy controlled ventilator several years later, but still long ago. And it was like 1994, and it was a Mac running Mac Lisp interface to a ventilator, and it was basically a fuzzy controller which tried to wean the baby from high oxygen, and it kept trying every minute to lower, and if the oxygen went down, it went back up. And instead of waiting for every 8 hours to make a decision, it was making trying to make a decision.
Micro decisions, yeah.
And of course, it weaned patients faster. And so this frustration, and given the stakes, this is as important as anything we do in human decision making. Lives are truly always on the line. How come we were doing this so unsystematically and so amateurish? And I was convinced that, certainly after my PhD, but I'd taken quite a lot of, I had minored in computer science as an undergrad. It just seemed to me there was so much more we could do, but the healthcare system was unaware of it. And this was what I'm saying was quite obvious to me and to others in the 1980s when I was doing my PhD in artificial intelligence and computer science. And most of the medical establishment did not get it. And I think what's wonderful and bad is that right now, medicine is really teetering, and the leaders know it, and they don't know what to do about it. Costs are going up, and so therefore profit margins, which were always small, are getting even smaller. And yet doctors are not keeping up, and we're losing all our primary care supply of human beings willing to do primary care. And at the same time, AI has been unleashed without specific thinking of it as a medical support to patients. And all of a sudden, there's a source of advice of second opinion, which is highly flawed, has many holes in it, but in the absence of time with the doctor, in the presence of doctors who sometimes are not in the top half of their class and are not up to date, patients are helping themselves. And so in between a wobbling healthcare system and patients are using AI to help themselves, I think what's wonderful is it's creating a moment where medicine has to recognize that whatever else it really is an information and knowledge processing discipline, and that we have the tools now, and we're going to have to embrace it. But because medicine is a high revenue, low margin effort, most of the innovation is going to be at the margins, that and revenue cycle management. And so the pressure from patients who are going to be catching errors, and there are so many stories I can share now about patients and friends who ended up being, we're all patients eventually, but friends, highly trained doctors who were mishandled by doctors and have used these large language models to get really important second opinions that have sometimes made diagnoses and defined therapies. That's going to drive things forward. But we're in a very interesting period where guys like yourselves, who formerly were part of large and important and admirable healthcare systems like Kaiser Permanente, are asking themselves, how do we accelerate change? Because these other existing systems are as unlikely to adopt AI wholesale as Google is likely to substitute large language models for search. It's trying to do it on the margins, but its main business is search. So it's a very difficult repositioning.
Yeah. That's a great example, like of the Google piece, because I think that was the worry. Like I remember when just, ChatGPT came out publicly, and people were going like, "Oh man, Google's done." Like this is the new way new interface to search. And then it just got better and better with being able to talk to it and kind of interact with it in a casual conversation. And it's like when we were driving up here to the mountains yesterday, one of my daughter asked a question, and my wife and I were chatting, and it's like my wife's instinct is to open up her phone and Google it, and of course my daughter's back there with like Microsoft Copilot, which she has on her phone, and she was like, asking it, and she got this crazy response, that to your point, you hope it's 100% accurate, but you don't know for sure. There could be like one piece in there that's critical, and that's the critical piece in medicine that is, I think, making so many people scared right now.
Yeah,
Is they're like, well,
but were we really scared when people used Dr. Google and they go up against so many things that are just plain wrong, and wrong in a way that is very aligned by whoever snarfed that searcher used?
So I think that was a great summary of everything that we'd love to cover and dive deeper into for this episode. One thing that struck me now is, this is the way that you were thinking about it, approaching it is really the same way that I think that Adam and I think about the problems facing clinical care and some of the optimizations needed to really help take better care of our patients and our providers. And it makes me think about, how long you've been at this. This is clearly informatics, the way that we're talking about the way that we think. When did you first call what you're doing medical informatics? How did that evolve? And when was the first time you heard that? And how have you seen that evolve?
Well, that's a really good question, because AI, artificial intelligence medicine, is actually a much older term in the United States than informatics. I think that what happened was, so when I was doing my PhD, I didn't think of myself as doing informatics. It was computer science, AI, applied to medicine. And I think what happened is, as the use of computer technology to improve healthcare systems spread throughout the world, it became clear that we wanted a word that would be recognizable to multiple languages and cultures. So in French, informatique means computer science, basically, and there are various versions of that, particularly in European languages, in whether it's German or French and other Romance languages. And so, because all the societies started, the professional societies who wanted to have international reach, started using the words informatics to describe that, even though it was not a natural for English and for Americans. That's what happened. And so I probably started hearing informatics in the mid 1990s. Yeah, it was very academic, and there were people will not remember this, but right now, what is the big sort of health IT meeting? It's like HIMSS, 60,000 people. And it absolutely, is the place where a lot of things are described and going on. But in fact, back in the 80s, it was more, you'd find more people at the American Medical Informatics Association. That was actually in the 90s, the American Medical Informatics Association, and you'd find necessarily at HIMSS. But of course, that got transformed and accelerated when, after Obama got elected and David Blumenthal went to Office of National Coordinator, all of a sudden there was billions of dollars in incentive payments being poured into EHRs. And so the already growing business of EHRs just had this huge inflection point when it just took off vertically, even though a lot of the technology, like the MUMPS language and database that underlies Epic and many other EHR vendors, was actually developed by academics. Forgive me if you already heard this, but the M in MUMPS is for Mass General Hospital. There was Octo Barnett, who was a Harvard Medical School professor, and he and 4 MIT undergrads in the middle of the 1960s took what was then extremely rare. There may have been 3 or 4 PDP-7s outside military research labs, and they implemented MUMPS including a real-time operating system, the hierarchical database, the programming language. And Octo himself was not interested in money, but I think 2 of the 4 MIT undergrads ended up being billionaires. But the reason I bring that up is it's a little irritating when I hear from various EHR leaders that they sort of invented EHRs, basically the technology that they're built on, and the technology and a lot of the work patterns came from the work that Octo and his people did, and they actually had deployed them as EHRs throughout many systems. If you look up the history of CoStar, for example, you'll see it throughout many systems. In fact, the worst thing about the so-called modern EHRs is they actually did not innovate rapidly. They stayed in their technological rut, so that by the time we got around to, like, let's say 2010, a year after those those incentive payments went out, I was looking at my iPhone and saying, wow. And I was looking at EHR, and it's like 1980s technology at best. And so that's, I think, an ongoing challenge that AI is going to face, is that right now it's changing, but medicine is still very much sort of a relationship game. The sales cycle for selling to healthcare systems, IT, is all about relationships, and decisions are not necessarily made on strong technical grounds. And truth be told, because the investments in these EHRs, which are outrageously expensive, like MGB, Mass General Brigham, probably spent, including consultants, maybe $2 billion in implementing Epic EHR, that the C-suite of these healthcare systems, they can't actually ever admit to a problem, because they're the ones that took an enormous amount of capital from their organizations to invest it. And so it's very hard to recognize that things are suboptimal. And second of all, again, going back to the low margin, there's just very little benefit to saying, oh, I'm going to risk changing the way we do medicine to improve it for patient care because we understand the way the future works. And the next year, you're going to have a 2% negative margin, which is tens of millions of dollars. And so this challenge between the commercial and the state of the art is quite dramatic, and it's much deeper than in consumer-facing industries. And so I remember once writing an article. It was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it was trying to make a point. I think I wrote this, I don't know, 2015 maybe. And I was saying I was observing a team across maybe 20 square miles in Boston, and they were all remote, and they were working on a common task, and they were tightly coordinated, and they had a 3-dimensional representation of their joint task, and they also had direct AV hookups to each of them. I said, this team was all 10-year-olds. One of them was one of my sons, and they were playing Minecraft. And so there's this complex topography that they were sharing, and they were coordinating their approach, and they were yelling at each other through FaceTime. And I was thinking, most of our doctors don't know where each other are. They're not, the teams are not coordinated, and the technology that they're using is so much more primitive than what these 10-year-olds are using. So I actually wrote this for one of our local NPR organizations back in the day, something like what we can learn from Minecraft. But that gap between the consumer-facing technologies and what we see in these organizations continues to this day, and we're going to see it again if healthcare doesn't get its act together. Whether we like it or not, patients and patient-centric organizations or lean startups that are providing an alternate means are going to be providing state-of-the-art technologies. Now, still, the bulk of the money what the system pays for is in the old way of doing things. But again, we're running out of money, and employers are beginning to be interested in alternative models. And I'm seeing new companies emerge who are actually taking on risk. They're saying, we'll take on this population, we'll manage it, and if patients do better and cost less, we'll split the profits. And I think that'll be some of the among the drivers. And it's very, very difficult for healthcare systems to innovate in that fashion. Now, it may be that by acquiring some of these companies or creating, it's hard to know exactly how it's going to happen because there's so much inertia.
Yeah, there's so much inertia, and there's so many layers of legacy that are baked into the current system. I always talk about how, I turned 47 this year. So I remember like yesterday when I went to my pediatrician as a child and had my regular well checks and my sports physicals, like that memory of that and what we do today in medicine is actually not any different. And I was like, man, that's like crazy. Because back when I was a kid, a cordless phone was a new thing. A microwave oven was invented. Like an answering machine was invented. All these technologies, frankly, that my mother actually resisted. She's like, I don't want an answering machine. I don't want a microwave. Like, if I'm going to cook something, I'm going to do it in the oven. And it's just like, to your point, what you're describing is healthcare has just been kind of stuck in its ways. We have video now. We have other asynchronous ways that we handle things, but it's fundamentally still the same transaction, right? It's patient, I have a problem, I have a condition, I have a concern, I have a new disease, and I need to transact with a clinician. And it's like, it's a proposition that's not going to work out, right? With the diminishing, like you said, diminishing primary care physician pool, frankly, diminishing physicians. The
Just for
notion
your
that
listeners,
a lot of medical
so you know
students.
how bad it. Okay, in the United States, by 2030, that's only less than 6 years away. The AMC estimates we'll be missing somewhere between 30 and 80,000 primary care doctors for a growing, aging population that'll need more care. I went to give a talk at the National Health Service in the UK. Very different model of funding healthcare. They have the same problem. No one's going into primary care. About half of the young doctors decide not even to practice medicine. I just talked to someone from Paris, and again, their pride used to be their primary care system, and no one's going into it because so many pressures, so many things to do, so much administrivia, and the pay sucks, and the prestigious low. Because of my involvement in AI, in fact, I wrote a book a couple of years ago with Peter Lee from Microsoft about AI, and with Carrie Goldberg, I got invited to many medical schools to talk about AI. And at every medical school I go to, I ask the students, what are you going to go into? And by and large, it's interventional radiology, orthopedics, and dermatology, not primary care, not geriatrics. And to your point, I'm trained as a pediatric endocrinologist. Last year, and it's been true for a couple of years now, only 60% of the slots are filled. And if you look across multiple pediatric subspecialties like behavioral developmental medicine, like for autism or ID, basically, if we accepted every single applicant, we would still not be close to 70% of all the open slots. So we're just running out of doctors, and not just this country. And although there are many problems with the way we fund and incent healthcare in this country, that problem, I'm telling you, is independent of the funding mechanism. Like I said, it's happening in France. It's happening in the NHS. I know that now from firsthand conversations, but secondhand, it looks like it's happening in many other parts of the world. So this is a growing problem with a growing aging population with less and less doctors who are willing to do the work in the trenches. So ultimately, we are going to have to do what we did in education, where we flipped the classroom to get the students more engaged and just be rather than just be talked at by the experts. We're going to have to flip the clinic, and we're going to have to flip the clinic by basically figuring out how to bake in healthcare services, opinions, interventions, guideline management ambiently through employers, family, a team of clinicians who are kept up to date. So And these clinicians may not be all MDs, probably going to be a large proportion of physician assistants and nurse practitioners who don't have either the financial debt or the attitudinal debt of medical training. And so we're going to have to flip the clinic, and that will be a disruptive model, and it'll be very interesting where that disruption happens. My worry might be that the more money that's involved, the more inertia there is. So there's a risk that some country, perhaps a less rich country, might actually just go there first. And that would be a shame for our patients.
Do you think that, obviously you've seen a lot of these transitions. We talked about the EHR piece where it really didn't evolve in the way that it needed to. Do you think that I haven't lived through as many of these as you have. So for me, I have a lot of excitement that this, AI piece can really bring that joy back into medicine, can optimize these things. But with your perspective, do you think that this seems different than other ones? What's your take on it?
But not for the obvious reasons. Like we're hearing a lot of joy about the fact that we can just do ambient dictation and based on the previous note, get a beautiful note, and it's not cut and paste like we did for so many EHR notes. That's wonderful. But how long do you think it's going to be before a department chair is going to say, "Oh, you're so much more efficient. Why don't you see 20% more patients?" I mean, that's the inevitable logic. Nonetheless, and so for anything that gets close to the bottom line, I see it. And so, for example, upcoding, which used to be done still is being done by teams of people in basements at hospitals, is going to be replaced by AI looking at the entire record and say, what's the maximum I can charge for this? And of course, on the insurance payer side, the same thing's going to be happening, which is, which of these doesn't make sense, which might be fraudulent, which can I just lowball? And so there's going to be an interesting, I think, conversation what happens ultimately when we have the AIs from both sides talking to each other pretty rapidly. I think it's going to make one good way it could end up is like, okay, here's the real story. Here is really what we're going to pay for. We don't have to spend $1 zillion on a war of two AIs. But the reason I'm optimistic is because medicine really is falling down. Patients are being misdiagnosed and they're being helped by AI. Sometimes they're not being helped, but a lot of them are being helped. And they just have to wait a long time for primary care. Mass General Brigham, I try to refer my faculty to primary care doctors, and in Mass General Brigham, there's not a single practice that's taking new patients. And so I think the opportunity is that there is a demand and no supply. And so that's where, now it's not clear exactly where the money will come from, but those pressures are just going to increase. And so I'm optimistic because unlike the way AI was when I was doing my graduate thesis, which was interesting, but nowhere near ready for work. This stuff, it's not perfect. In fact, it has a lot of flaws, but it does a lot of good things that patients need, from interpreting whatever the doctor sent, what the lab said, telling them why this drug is not going to be good, or why the symptoms they're feeling actually is what it is, or telling us that their doctor is actually saying the wrong thing. I have a friend of mine who is at a very high leadership position in one of our largest academic healthcare centers. And he had, unfortunately, a tumor. He was given a diagnosis. His wife sent me the tumor diagnosis and the mutations that were present. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. I'm not a oncologist, but this was a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. So I gave GPT-4 mutations and the name of the tumor. I said, what's the best treatment for this? And it said, well, before we go there, that's a very unusual set of mutations for that tumor. So I went back to his wife, who's also a researcher. Long story short, misdiagnosis.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so this happens. And so this is a guy who's incredibly connected and is a researcher in his own right. So this is happening all the time. We just don't know about it. Now, having the second opinion where we're not embarrassed to say, is this right? Is going to reveal so many sloppy things that happen.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up so many good points that, even to the beginning, and Adam and I have talked about this a lot, that this initial idea of things that we want is to help us diagnose patients, help us treat patients and use that evidence. But then again, you just eloquently put it, that's not the ROI piece. That's not the piece that's easy to evolve. How do we get there? Do you think there'll be the consumer pressure? Like, because if these tools exist, I know they won't integrate with the EHR, but doctors, med students, they're going to want them on their phone if they're going to help them take better care of patients. Do you think that the consumer
It's a
side
good
goes
question.
first?
I mean, I do. There's no question that the young doctors are going to use that, even though in some cases they might be in HIPAA violation, because if you go through Microsoft Azure, for example, it's HIPAA protected. But if you go through OpenAI, to my knowledge, they don't have the standing to be HIPAA protected. So you're not putting in identified patients, but doctors can do it anyway because these young doctors are under super pressure and they have to get their job done. And so they'll just do it. So that might happen. But the thing is, the power politics in medicine is such that they might do it, but no one's going to salute, or very unlikely to salute. And so I do think that the pressure is going to be there. And I know Musk is not a popular figure among many people, but I think he came up with an interesting, unusual way of doing disruption. My late friend, Clay Christensen, who was a wonderful man, talked about disruption. He always gave examples like Toyota, which disrupted from below, low-end cars for college kids. But what Musk did is, I'm going to do something very revolutionary, but we don't know really how to do it. We don't know how to do the supply chain. We're going to do it for very boutique-y, expensive people. So he created this speedster, sportster for high-end. And it sucks, but it may be true that the initial models will come out of sort of high-end, boutique-y, we do better than unassisted concierge doctors, and we're going to be up to date on all medicine. We're not going to forget things that I have a concierge doctor, and he forgets things that he was supposed to do. And so having these plugged in, I think, so that model might work out. And then employers are going to say, we want our employees to have that. Because remember, employers pay for healthcare in the United States, other than Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, individual health insurance is just a small component. And so I think that's where it's going to come from. Exactly how it shows up to the employers, not clear. But the pressures are going to be there because we're not delivering. We're just not delivering, and people are going to ask. So that's good.
No, and I love we're in the interest of time. Yeah, I think what you just hit on too is, I think Dale and I talk about this a lot, is, this type of evolution of anything does happen frankly, with the people initially that can afford it, because usually it comes at an exceptional cost, like you gave in the
And
Tesla
by the way,
example.
I would feel more badly
but
about it, but when people say, isn't AI going to cause disparities? And my immediate answer is, no, our current system is enforced. If you have money, you can get a concierge doctor. If you're rich and well-connected, you can find that person in your network who knows who to ask, which is the right surgeon. I mean, rich people are on boards of hospitals so that they can ask, who's the right doctor for my family member or friend? And so that's hugely...
Yeah, and AI can level that playing field, right? I mean, that's what you're describing. Yeah, I think Dale and I both agree with that. I mean, I guess one last quick question. I'd love your quick thoughts on, just looking to the future of patients. I mean, you've sprinkled this throughout, how people are already using the current technology, but I mean, these models are only going to get better, right? I mean, they're only going to get better. They're going to get more accurate, more precise. I mean, it's going to lead to, discovering crazy things. And what is if you have a crystal ball, where do you think that future is, for patients? And how does that still tie in with, we'll just say the primary care medical system, concierge or whatever? I think,
people talk about conflict of interest, and they usually mean financial conflict of interest. I think the biggest conflicts of interest are ideas that you think are good and you're willing to fight for them, but don't know when to ask you to disclose that real conflict of interest. So, but I'll share with you my conflict of interest because I know it's influencing what I say, so therefore it may not be right. So with a bunch of colleagues, Rachel Ramoni, Josh Mandel, now currently at Microsoft, and my friend Ricky Bloomfeld, now at Apple, and Ken Mandel at Children's Hospital in Boston, back in 2009, Ken and I basically wrote a New England Journal of Medicine article saying, why couldn't health IT be more like the iPhone, modular, so you could take the best functions that you wanted? And that led to a standard called Smart on Fire. And that standard was adopted by a bunch of health EHR vendors, 6 out of the top ones, but it didn't really have the impact I'd hoped it would, because they still controlled access to their EHR platform. But the unexpected thing that happened is Ricky Bloomfeld, who had been an informatics doctor at Duke, was acquired by Apple, and he's been in charge of all the EHR data being pulled into Apple Health. And so, for example, as an MGP patient, I can see my labs, my meds, my diagnoses, my reports, demographics, and I'm not even talking about the wearable stuff, really the stuff from the hospitals. And so under the 21st Century Cures Act, patients are entitled to a computable copy, not just a fax, computable copy of their EHR data. And I think you're going to start seeing businesses being formed around this. So Apple has ensured that 800 hospitals provide that API access. 800 hospitals, tens of millions of Americans, and there are also a few hospitals in Canada and UK. And so I don't know if it's going to happen through Apple, but there's going to be something like that where the data gets liberated. The healthcare data gets liberated outside these legacy platforms so that they can be integrated as basically part of customer relations for you, my employee. I'm going to make sure that you have good workouts, and the AI is going to make sure that you get the best care. And I have a bunch, I've contracted with the following companies that have clinicians that work with AI, so you'll get great care. And so I think the combination of the liberation of data under legislation like 21st Century Cures Act, which mandates APIs for computable data coming out of EHRs, that and a expectation on part of patients that will be driven by employers, that I think is where it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, where Dale and I are thinking too, around this whole evolution of...
Only thing will happen through, or when it becomes clear that that's the way it might happen, then all the hospitals and EHR vendors will like, whoa. Okay, well, now we're really going to play the full game.
Yeah, it'll take something like that to be the catalyst. You're right. Yeah. Well, Zach, this was a super fun conversation, and we always like to end our shows with some like very lighthearted, fun questions. Right. So we'll take the last 5 minutes and these are obviously we didn't give you these questions ahead of time, but Dale and I will ping pong these real quick. Right. Dale, why don't you hit with the first one?
Yeah. So we talked a lot about your work. What's your favorite thing about your job?
Talking to young students. It keeps you young.
Love it.
It makes me smart.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Agree.
I just told my daughter that. I said the best way to learn something in school that you find, easy or whatever, you understand the concept, is teach it to like someone else. And it's, Dale and I have a strong kind of teaching background too in our roles. Awesome. What's the favorite thing about the city you live in, or maybe even where you're physically located right now with those beautiful trees?
Yeah. Actually, so an advertisement for Boston. We used to call ourselves the hub of the universe. Right now we are. There's this amazing intersection of academia, pharma, and even AI organizations, with this amazing combination of, these universities that are strong in health sciences and IT. I tell all my students that this is right now the Athens of the world. And I remember when, should I say this? Yes. When I was being recruited to Stanford, they told me, Zach, when I was at Harvard, my 3 world competitors were in the same building. Here at Stanford, I'm the top dog. And it's true that Stanford has top of the world professors, but here we have 10 of everything. And what it means is, A, no one's that important, but B, as a student, you can go around and you can just knock on doors. And if you're not shy, and it's important not to be shy, you learn so much. It's so easy to learn. You don't have to read books. You just can go into a seminar. It's just so exciting to be in Boston right now for that reason.
That's a great sell.
It is a sell. Thank you, Mayor Wu.
Oh, that's good.
This episode is not sponsored by the city of Boston.
Yeah.
All right, next up, what's a surprising fact about you?
That I was not born American. Even though I have this American accent, I sound like a New York Jew. Actually, I grew up in Geneva, Switzerland. My first 17 years there, my parents were from Poland. My television was in French. Local neighborhood kids were in French, but I went to international school with British teachers. But everybody, all the kids got American accents because the smallest, the biggest minority were American kids. They were the cool kids, and everybody got their accents. And so I only came to this country for college, and I only became naturalized American at age 25. Love America, but I have this weird American accent, even though my parents were not native-born English speakers, and my environment most of the time was French.
Yeah, fooled me. Maybe you're using an AI filter. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. This is not, yes.
We're not talking to the real Zach. All right, last question for this, and then we'll turn you loose for your day. Is there still a skill that you'd like to master at this point in your life?
Wow. I tried playing piano as a kid. I wasn't good at it. I really wish I could play an instrument well. That'd be great.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you see someone just like singing, playing an instrument, like just it's like a skill that is just it's mind-boggling to me. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's beautiful to listen to.
Just one more question. You've obviously been involved in this space. You saw ChatGPT way before Adam and I have seen it. So the most interesting people in this space. If you were listening to NerdMD's podcast, is there any physician, technologist out there that you'd be interested to hear an episode about?
No, I would be interested in hearing from the current head of United Health Group what they think they'll pay for in AI.
Yeah, sweet, awesome, Zach. Well, thank you for taking time to chat with us. We really, really appreciate it. I know our listeners will love this episode. Thank you for listening to Efficiency Unlocked, Nerd Tested, MD Approved, a NerdMD's podcast by Drs. Adam Carewe and Dale Gold.